Welcome back to the podcast known as the Pod of Many Things, the chill roundtable podcast where we discuss everything and all things tabletop RPG. Continuing with our new format, I'm Adderson, your resident friendly Furbolg wizard, multi-classing into Bard despite the charisma requirement. And as usual, I am joined by my favourite half-orc Bard, a newly multi-classed artificer, Leon. Say hi, Leon.
Howdy, Leon.
So this is a pre-recording of something we've done before, but we kind of lost it in translation and in editing. So if we seem a bit rehearsed, it's because we're still in the headspace. It's not because like we're reading off a script or anything. But Leon, we aren't alone today, are we? We have our friend Sean here. Say hi, Sean.
Hello, and thanks for inviting me to your brilliant podcast. No, thanks very much. I feel even more honoured. I noticed for most of the intro before everybody joined us, I was literally kept in the dark, so it was very good.
Yeah. So you're here to talk with us about settings today, which is something I know you have a lot of experience with over not just D&D, but many systems.
Yeah, indeed.
And I'm quite excited about that. So how about, to start with, you kind of introduce yourself, tell us about your history in the space of tabletop RPGs, and then we will dive right into...
Oh, I'll keep it pretty short because it'll be boring, and no one wants a boring podcast. So yeah, I've been DMing for closing in on 40 years now. It's quite remarkable, really. Been in, and it's been all the time, continuous. There's never been 1 week in 40 years I haven't DM'd. So just to give some sort of perspective on it.
Longevity.
But obviously, once you've been GMing for a long time, you then start turning your attention to crafting, products that you think you could do better, and it's not an easy gig, I've got to be honest, but have had a lot of success with it. Worked for DCC, that's Dungeon Crawl Classics. Also been designing board games, got a few Kickstarters off the ground successfully, and now looking at a couple of projects for the near future. One is my own RPG, and a board game I've been working on called Mobtown, which is very close in place. It's in the playtest, big end of playtest phase, so hopefully next year.
So you've had an amazing career. So as part of like our podcast, we have like avatars, like classes and races that we assign to ourselves. And one of the things we want to do with you, Sean, I think I'll take the lead on this one because I've had the most experience with you and working with you, is we'd like to assign one to you, if that's okay. And we're going to tell you what we think it is, give you our reasoning, and then you can agree, disagree.
I instantly know where I'm going with this. I'm thinking, just based on what you've told us already, I'm thinking some kind of wizard.
Yeah,
I'm very honoured by that.
On my sheet here, I've got High Elf Wizard, because you know how high elves are like
ridiculously proud.
Yeah, ridiculous. No, not even that. It's the fact that they're like seen as this like font of knowledge, aren't they? They're like high knowledge. Yeah. They know like lost arts and stuff like that because it's passed down, and they're like the. I see them in most settings as like the dads of all the other races. They like tell everybody else how to do stuff.
I can live with that analogy. Yeah. That's very apt. You're very right. I mean, it's all smoke and mirrors, obviously.
Yeah.
there's a half-orc waiting to break out, but I like the idea of the wizard.
Yeah, that's so very knowledgeable. Your wisdom and experience, obviously, that we want to tap into today.
Well, I really, really appreciate that. It's a great analogy, and thank you for that. It's very kind. Thank you.
So now we know who the guest is. Let's get into the meat and potatoes of today's podcast, which is settings. The item on today's table is settings, the worlds in which we host our adventures, the worlds we create and interact with. I think a good place to start when we talk about setting is not through listing published and homebrew settings, but to actually instead talk about what makes a good setting, and then after that go into where published settings succeed and what we can do with those things in our own homebrew settings. So the idea of generalizing and comparing. So do you want to start us off, Sean, and talk about what you think makes a good setting, and having that almost game design element to your
just a general, without going too specific, a general overview would be something that really stirs your imagination. So that's the first thing I'd look at. Easy to understand, however has some depth to it, and if I'm honest, it's something I want to play as much as I want to DM. If a setting does that, as a GM, I'm already invested because I know if I want to play it, there's a very, very high chance the players will love it too. So that's how I generally sort of view a setting. If it makes me excited to want to play it, then I know that because I'm excited to play, it's already going to affect the way that I think about the setting and the kind of stories I'm going to be able to write for it.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Leon, we usually talk about unique selling points, the USPs. Between us two.
I think everything needs a
explain
unique
that
selling
idea
point,
and see
and
if Sean likes it?
the thing is with D&D, everything is with the main modules that come out, everything is set in the Forgotten Realms, and I find the Forgotten Realms to be incredibly vanilla as a setting. There's not really anything that makes it stand out, and I would imagine that's kind of by design, because you could take sections and you can add your own stuff to it. You can take things out of it and you can put stuff into your own worlds. But when I say a unique selling point, Adderson, I have not told you this because I've been waiting for the podcast to tell you, but I may have purchased something today, something that I said I wasn't going to buy until the paper book came out. I may have purchased it online instead. I went and purchased Theros. Yes. Theros has a massive unique selling point. Not only is it a Magic the Gathering setting, but it is heavily based on ancient Greek mythology, which is something that, at least in my experience of D&D, and having looking at the previous modules that have come out since 5e has come out, is completely different to any other setting so far. If you look at the races, very limited in races. You've got a couple of new ones in there. If you have a look at the world itself, it's almost as if it's kind of like a demi-plane. The whole world is like 200 miles wide. It's crazy. And I've been flicking through the book. I think that the biggest unique selling point for me has been the piety system, an actual mechanism for using gods in your campaign, which I think is something that's been missing from 5e since the very beginning. Unique selling points, things like that, things that make your setting different to just the vanilla Forgotten Realms.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, I have got one setting that I always go back to, and I think very much like you've said there, Leon, that it really hits those points. I love what you've said, because I love ancient Greek, because you can immediately, no matter who you are, you can immediately visualize that. So that helps a great deal. Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay is one of my absolute go-to systems when I need inspiration. What makes it special from a unique selling point of view is the fact that the world itself is very much modelled on our own world. So it's basically kind of 14th century Renaissance Germany is the best way to describe it. So there is kind of gunpowder weapons. There is still some magic left, but it's very dangerous. But what makes it brilliant is that all the areas themselves are easy to put, easy to understand. For example, to the south is Bretonnia, which effectively is France. You have Albion, which we all know is England. You have Kislev, which is Russia. So you can immediately understand the cultures that exist, and you can throw together an accent if you want an arrogant Bretonian Frenchman running around. You can do all that kind of stuff in it, and it's already there for you. Plus, it has, without a shadow of a doubt, probably one of the greatest campaigns ever written for a game I've ever seen in terms of handouts, depth, and it's just inspirational, and that makes it special. That's one that I always go back to for if I ever get stuck or writer's block. I just pick a book up like that, and immediately my mind has loads of new ideas just because of it. It sounds very much like this, which immediately I think sounds intriguing. I've already got my mind thinking, oh, that sounds like a good idea. I'll have to have a look at that.
Yeah, I when I think about settings, we've talked about it before as well, Sean, in the DM panel, is purpose. Yeah. I think setting has to have like a purpose to it. So, and that purpose has to bleed out into everything. So if your world's purpose is to make things difficult, so say for Barovia, it is to basically corrupt and stand in the way of everybody trying to escape and trapping people there for Curse of Strahd, then people reflect that, and that purpose is apparent through everything that happens. The Mist, the Vistani, and how they operate. In my own personal campaigns and on my own personal like homebrew settings, I always think about what is the purpose of this place? What does it do for the people who are in it? And what will it do for my players? So That's always been one of my key things, and we talked about it when we did the podcast before.
Yeah, so it has a distinctive theme and tone, which sets it apart. Yeah, I like that. Yeah, it's a very good thing. Very good.
I think those are some interesting expectations that we've set up. So Sean's was about that idea of having it be creative, something that you want to play in, something you are excited about, and making it exciting. Leon talked about the unique selling points, and I talked about like what's the purpose. So based on our points and what we said, do we think that RPG publishers, with their teams of people, sometimes 20 to 30 people working on these products, do we think they always get it right? Is there any examples that we have and where we think actually no, they setting, now that we've like set up the parameters of what we think it makes a good setting? Leon, how about we start with you? You've just bought Theros. Do you think that it
I think the thing that really sets it apart is
successful
that it's
in being a good
to any
setting?
other 5e module or setting so far, just by virtue of the extra mechanics, the piety system, the massive limitation to the races. I mean, there's only like 5-6 races you can choose from, whereas any other setting in 5e now you can choose from the litany of like, I don't know, what are we up to, like 30 something individual races. So yeah, I think it achieves what it's set out to do. It's very different. You have Eberron and you have Ravnica. I don't really feel that there's enough difference between those two settings to justify buying both books. Whereas I feel like what they've done with Theros is night and day, basically. It feels like playing a completely different system, just reading through Theros.
Yeah. What about you, Sean? You've obviously seen settings from different publishers and different systems over as you've said, a massive amount of time you've been DMing. Do you think publishers always get this sort of thing right? Or
no? I think Leon hit the nail on the head when he said a lot of it's very vanilla. I mean, if you take Pathfinder's core setting, it's bland. It's same as 5th edition. A lot of the core settings are very, very bland, but they were done that way because they had probably 30 or 40 writers who weren't necessarily in the same room, who were given maybe an objective of what to achieve. And when you put it all together, it cobbles together. And you can feel in some ways it's cobbled together. It works. And as a generic, like you said, Leon, as a generic sort of overview of the system, you can take out the bits you like or put in the bits you want. And that's probably why they designed it that way. So you've got kind of pick the areas. I always get a bit fed up when I see, I've never used the Sword Coast. Faroon, I've never used it because everybody sticks on the Sword Coast. They don't go anywhere else. I think that's really lame. I just get really bored with it. I want a setting for the players that inspires them. And if they know a lot about something, sometimes that also holds them back from exploration because they're frightened of something. I don't want that. I want them to find out themselves and make their own decisions about what they like or what interests them. And sometimes settings hold you back. So often the best ones are the ones written only by a handful of people who work together.
Good point about the Sword Coast. I've never understood why they only they have this entire world, but they only focused on the Sword Coast. I don't understand that. You could probably get, 15, 20, 30 different settings out of that one world alone, but they only focus on this one coast of the place. It doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, and the difference is if you go right the way back into the history of Dungeons and Dragons, you probably have some experience or know of or have heard of Greyhawk.
yeah,
And Greyhawk is without a shadow of a doubt, it's the absolute grandfather of all of these. And what makes it brilliant is not because it's so detailed; it's provocative. Everything that was laid out is very provocative, and all the areas have a kind of an interesting mystery to them that not much is explained, and that's clever because as a GM, I don't want someone to guide my hand and tell me everything. All I want them to do is kind of lay out a mystery and then let me decide how it actually unfolds. That's the magic of the old system. A pamphlet of 28 pages was enough to give someone 40 years of gaming. I think that tells you an awful lot about how clever the system is and how great the setting is. Okay, over time, people have expanded upon it, but it's been a collective, a lot of people coming together and loving Greyhawk and have collaboratively built this fantastic tome of a world, which is amazing. I mean, if you want to go even kind of deeper and really look at something that, say, maybe is even, more kind of evolved than anything else, then you really need to sort of look at some of the more modern products and the way that they now handle things. I know we've got a good friend of ours, mine and Adderson, a guy called Ben, absolutely into Forbidden Lands. Again, another setting with just like a hint at what's really there and allowing you the scope to go and explore it. It's very clever, really, in many ways. Very old school, but that's a good method sometimes. Because, settings don't always know your players, and that's one of the biggest problems. They don't know your group, and vanilla setting can be really problematic, I think, for that.
I like the word provocative. I think that's a really good way to talk about how settings should be, that they should be provocative. They should draw something out of you as a reaction to them. And Greyhawk, I think, is one of those, because it's kind of like really gritty, isn't it? It's like very much like fight to survive sort of thing.
But they had this wonderful kind of, just getting to places just felt, dangerous. Trying to reach the marge to try and enter the desert region that was inhabited by the slavers. I mean, it's just genius. The whole thing was really simple but very well thought through and has a lovely feel to it. So again, as a writer or creator, it's something you go back to. I do a lot. Whenever I get a stumbling block, I just always go back to it's like having great books, isn't it, in a library? You go back to the ones that really inspire you, and the stuff that never does,
Sure.
you just sits
Can I
on
ask
the
you a
shelf
question?
looking pretty. That's what often happens.
You just mentioned in the work that you were discussing a section with slavers. I'm not sure if you've been following what's going on with what's going on over at Wizards of the Coast, but they're doing a lot of retroactive. They're doing a lot of retconning to their worlds. And one thing that I'm concerned about is that all of the materials coming out going forward are going to be hindered by what's going on politically at the moment. So things like slavers, and people with dubious morals such as that. Do you think it's going to have a huge effect on those kinds of stories that Wizards are going to be willing to tell?
I think the problem is that the big companies, this is where they're going to be hindered, really. Is we all know, if we're honest, if we take a step back, role-playing has always been about, beyond the boundaries that exist in front of you. You want to be able to go out beyond those boundaries. Now, the great thing about modern gaming, I find, is that a lot of people have introduced like a card system, black card system or whatever you want to call it. I think that's perfectly good. I think that's a great system, because if you touch on an area perhaps that's gone just that little too far, someone can say, hey, this is not quite where I want it to go. And as a GM, you can adapt, and that's fine. I think that's enough. I mean, you want to have the freedom to tackle deep and difficult subjects, because that's how we all learn. And actually, we all know that in our gaming worlds, it's escapism. I've never met anybody in my life, when it comes round to the table, we all play under the same banner. When you're around that table, all you're interested in is gaming. That's all you're interested in. That's the wonderful thing about role-playing today. It's an amazing thing. I would like to hope that we're free of some of the issues that the world currently has. And I think role-playing really is one of the great last bastions of it, because we've known for a long time. I have, anyway. I mean, when I grew up, people thought it was a dark art that I was studying. That they thought we were heading to some graveyard in the middle of the night to terrorize it. Terrorize and take away their young daughters. If only. I mean, come on.
If only with the daughters. If only with the daughters.
When I was growing up, it wasn't cool. Now suddenly it's damn cool. I'm too old to enjoy it. This is just not right, is it? It's just not right. So. No, we're in a great place. I think role-playing is in a really good place. But I think big productions, but big companies are really going to be hampered. So I think it's going to come from the smaller designers is where the real innovation is going to come from, I think, moving forward. And it's a shame because, racism and various topics like that in this industry, which I understand why they've come around, but it's a real shame because none of that, I've never, in 40 odd years at the table, I've never seen that. That's never come out. Yes, we tackle difficult subjects, but it's always been fun, and it's always been about the good part, the freedom of, saving
That's it. They're there to be bad guys for you to kill. Orcs, drow, goblins, slavers, whatever. They're there for you to kill because they're bad guys and you're good guys.
I want my. Yeah. I know that I know that a lot of the time as a GM I'm quite crafty. Not all my bad guys wear black and all my white guys wear a white Stetson hat. I know that, but they are fairly obvious which are the bad guys, and I'd like to keep some of those, frankly, and I don't want to feel that I can't bring them to the table because it's not the right thing to do. And I'm afraid I just won't do that. If somebody's got a problem, then raise your card. I won't bring them in. It's fine. But really, I think we can do better than this, to be honest. I don't think that's the magic of role-playing and gaming. I just think it's a wonderful industry. It's a shame we've got to this stage because there'll be no end to this. That's the issue with this. Now, once you start this Pandora's box, everything will suddenly become very bland, and eventually you'll have exactly what you said. It'll be a tiny portion of the Sword Coast that you can game in where everybody's equal.
Yeah.
And it won't be a very nice place. I can tell you, the worst place in the world to game in.
Yeah, I think me and you tackled this in an earlier episode, Leon, but I think that settings that have those complicated and layered problems that you actually have a hand in possibly for the first time in your life, and I know it's pretend, but you can take out your frustrations with it. And as a teacher, I've used them as teaching moments. Like,
yeah,
these people are treated like this, and you know what? That's not okay. Like, and we can fix that. Yeah. And I think that's one of the cool things about settings is that layering.
And one of the, some of the greatest achievements, some of the moments around the table where you literally got your players jumping up from their seats, high-fiving each other and going, wow, that was amazing, is those moments when they have defeated something so hideous, so evil, so cruel, that it really mattered to them. And for me, that's one of the greatest moments. So if you could bottle that up and feed it to the rest of the world, I think we'd be golden, frankly.
Have you got an example of like a world where that's really possible? Like, I think I want you to think about this as well, Leon. Let's talk about some examples of actual published settings then that nail that kind of feeling. So I like that idea of like fixing problems, changing the world, winning.
My name, The Outsiders, because my acronym, if you will, on YouTube is Outsiders 68, and the reason it's called The Outsiders 68 is because my RPG that I worked on for many years is called the Outsiders RPG, and it's all about to complete flip of the switch, ironically, that all the normal races have been basically wiped out. So all the races you assume have gone, and all you have left are the orcs, the goblins, the gnolls, and everything else. But the players actually played those original races, those that were hidden away, that somehow managed to survive underground for this length of time. So they're like fairy tales. And they're forced above ground, and then it's a complete flip of the switch. So everything
fantasy Fallout.
Yeah, so everything they do is got to be measured. It's careful. If you get seen, you're going to be hunted down because you're legendary, you're folklore. So you have to carefully think, and there's nowhere to fall back to. But there's a hint that there may be a northern resistance. There's certain clues that's going on. And the way I liked it is that the way I came up with the idea was that the characters lived underground because they had these Melstarian crystals, and the idea behind the crystals was that they give off natural light and natural heat, and they needed 12 for their community. Roughly 100 of them have survived underground for a couple of generations underground. And their leader, this Narelle, this wizard, comes to the group, the key people of the group, and says, "The crystals are failing. We now need 12 others. You have to venture above ground. We've got no choice. You have to go out." So they have to go and find them. And that's what I loved about that. And it creates some of the greatest highlights for me as a GM, because my players challenged me in so many unique ways and couldn't fall back on their preconceptions. And it was great fun. And it was a great fun campaign.
I think I'm obviously a bit biased because I love the show Critical Role. And I think Matt Mercer's a genius, rah, rah, rah. And everybody's going to be like, Adderson, all you ever do is talk about him. But you know what? I'm going to keep going.
Anything that inspires you.
Yeah, the Wildmount continent on Exandria is really interesting because there's you're basically, if you play in a certain time, you are in the middle of a war between two great empires. You've got the Dwendalian Empire, mainly your humans, your standard magic people who are usually the good guys, and then on the other side you have the Kryn dynasty, who are basically all drow or monstrous races, goblins, everything like that, and they are working with different kinds of magic. So they have this thing called Dunamancy, which is basically time-space magic, which is like really cool. I'm not gonna lie, like can end fate and stuff, and you can like warp. And like basically the Dwendalians think that's heretical, like that's not a good thing to do. Like they worship a different god as well. And I think putting all those issues in it is art imitates life, and like you get to see the conflict from both sides. You can start in the Dwendalian Empire and go, "Ooh, I don't think these guys are as good as I thought they were. And then you can go to the Kryn and go, actually, these guys aren't the monsters that I've been told as bedtime stories, sort of thing. And you can look at the very grey thing of combat and war and like reasons why, and like the thinly veiled reasons as well. Like, oh, we have a problem with the Kryn because they do terrible things. No, you like actually in some sorry for spoilers, like in some cases the thing is that they want to learn about Dunamancy and the Kryn won't tell them. They're like, yeah, we're not going to tell you about Dunamancy because that's ours. Like, we made that. You don't get that. And they're like, well, we'll take it then. And and then I think that's a really good way to create a setting. Like the purpose of that is to explore that conflict and to explore that duality and dichotomy. Whereas if you take that away, if you take that away, it's like you said, vanilla. It's like, ugh.
You'll never get the same moments around the table, and once you go past a certain point, honestly, the gaming is massively hampered. And if you think it's a struggle to find GMs now, imagine what it's going to be like in 20 years if we get too far to one side of this. It'll be really difficult because people won't have any enjoyment of it. They'll just feel they can't do anything about people raising cards or saying I can't do this, or you'll never go anywhere, and that's a real shame. So I think the truth is, role-playing is bigger than this, and I really believe we can bring out the best in this situation, and we can actually really enjoy it. The big companies may struggle because, as I say, they're going to have problems. They're going to have to kind of toe the company line, but I think it'll be the third-party publishers and various games that will come out, hopefully positive games that focus on the good side of this, which is the key, and I think a lot will. So that's the positive.
What about you, Leon? What's an example of a setting you think has had those layers?
I think you know which one I'm going to talk about because I keep talking about it on this podcast. Barovia, fantastic setting, or Ravenloft, whatever you want to call it. This is a place where literally everything is bad. Yeah, the common people are the type of people to literally sell their children for drugs. You have the Vistani, and I know the Vistani are controversial right now, but there are two camps of Vistani. One of the camps is good, one of the camps is bad, and that's fine. We can do that. But when it comes to the world at large, the forest itself is trying to kill you. There's things in the water that are trying to kill you. Everything in the castle is alive. Just everything's trying to kill you. And it's such a dark and depressing place. And the thing that really gives it that extra layer is yourself as a DM. Putting in those little tiny hints of light here and there to make this place feel less depressing. And that can be just like helping somebody on a road. It can be finding something in a house or a tavern that people seem to enjoy, and that's not evil, like a toy. There's a fantastic toy maker in there who is one of the people that at first glance seems like he's gonna probably try and cut your head off while you're sleeping, but you speak to him for a little while, and then you go away and nothing happens. His name's Blinksy. And he makes toys, and one of the things that he says is, "He's no Blinksy, he's no fun," which is his toy slogan, and he's an amazing little character. But yeah, Barovia is one of those places I think has those extra layers that makes it really engaging and not quite what it seems on the surface. I know from the surface you kind of hate the place, Adderson, but. Yeah, but you haven't had the chance to explore it. We only had 2 sessions before lockdown started. But if we were to continue exploring it, then you would have saw those little bits of light in the dark place of Barovia.
The thing is, I don't. Yeah. The thing is, I don't hate it in terms of like as a setting. I actually think it's a really good setting, and I like again that purpose is to hamper you and impede you and like. Strahd needs you to stay the hell away from him and not kill him. So the world that he created is there going, yeah, don't go near Strahd. Like that makes sense. It's just that I hated playing in it because I just felt like I was losing all the time, and I'm a bad loser. Not gonna lie. I'm not gonna.
Yeah.
But I think with one last thing before we head off onto the next thing, which is homebrew settings, like because Leon kind of touched on it, and it's something that I did want to ask. Do you think that settings are just geography, Like some people are very much like settings are just geography. I can insert whatever people I want in there. Or do you think that there are certain NPCs that a setting needs in order to, like staple NPCs that a setting needs in order to be like this layered, good, provocative thing? Leon, Sean, sorry.
Oh, thank you. To be honest, to cut a long answer short, no. I think the trouble often is with a setting that's particularly well detailed, except in Ravenloft's case, because the bad guy is just too cool for school. I love that guy.
Yep.
I call him Vlad the Impaler. I know that's not his name, but that's just who I refer.
Who he's literally based on.
That's who he reminds me so much of. Yeah. But the classic part of all of this really is very simple. I know from a GMing perspective that whenever I spent a lot of time building these NPCs, even if the players interacted with them, they weren't the ones they loved. It was often the ones that I kind of come up with on the fly that they fell in love with. So I've always kind of spent more time on, I have some key NPCs the players may interact with, but if they don't, that's okay. And if they find others that they really enjoy interacting with, then that's great. Let's build that Blinksy story that you have. That kind of thing. That really works. We've all got them. I mean, I've got some classics in my time. Metelka Hertz, and that's a character I can bring back. Mendes is a character for Cthulhu who always comes back. There's so many different personalities that just come back. I think that's what happens when you've GM for a long time. You have split personalities, various NPCs that you enjoy. And often the players enjoy too, because they see the fun in those characters. And that is another part of it. It's the fun. And even the bad guys, you kind of admire them in a weird way because they have those schemes. And that's part of the fun as well, I think, if it's done well.
What about you, Leon? Do you think that a setting is just geography, or do you think that?
I mean, if you're going to boil it down to geography, a setting's just going to be that. It's just going to be geography. It's what is among the geography that brings the place to life. I mean, Sean's already touched on most of it, so I'll just say that it's really the NPCs. It's what's happening. It's the history. It's all that kind of stuff that brings the geography to life.
I like that. My response is all I ever think of when I think of NPCs, like staple NPCs that make us setting what it is. I always think of Xanathar. Sitting below Waterdeep, like waiting, trying not to get his fish killed, but then his fish dying and someone having to replace it. I think that idea of like some of these great characters are too good to not be a part of the setting. So I understand your point, Sean, about the fact that you can make the greatest characters in the world, NPCs in the world, and nobody cares about them. But I do think some of those ideas, like you said, Mendes, those reoccurring characters are so good that they just become part of the setting. And you just like, would you use Mendes, for example, in a D&D game? Or
I would. Yeah, depending on the. I mean, I don't. If I know it's players I've played with before, I'd never bring them up again. But it's often, these characters will come alive, and that's where Warhammer. I brought Warhammer Fantasy into it at the beginning because it's got the most provocative setting. You have chaos rather than dark creatures. It's chaos that has come out of God knows where it's come from, and it's lurking in the shadows. People have begun to realise it's there, but thankfully it doesn't seem to be organised. But that's the magic of a wonderful setting. Plus, it's got all these wonderful towns with provocative names, with the Reich River that actually has a proper trading system that exists that makes you feel invested immediately into it. That actually you can make money on the river. Is a game in itself, Plus, there's all sorts of clever things that happen in trading. Like, would you like to take this large box on your boat? How much would it cost? It's this much. And then you later find out it's a vampire you've loaded onto your boat. I mean, it's absolutely staggeringly brilliantly funny. There are so many clever bits. I also have a sense of humor in that setting, which I like, and particularly in this kind of time period we're now. Warhammer did it best. They had humor through the names sometimes. I mean, Boggenhaven, the big boss, was known as Edam Savanovich, the big cheese. I mean, it's brilliant. Those kind of things. I mean, you may miss them. When it's first said, Edam Savanovich, that's the big boss. And then later you realise he's the big cheese. And I love that. And the other thought that they did within that setting, which again really inspired me, and they go back a long way for this, was one of the very first handouts I ever had was a little handout on it, which had at the very bottom a maker's mark, a printer's mark on the handout you go to the players. And that is critical within the game. It becomes very important. So when the players discover and work out, where did this handout come from? And they see that maker's mark, they can go and investigate it. Suddenly your handouts have even more. In time, that inspired me to have watermarks, hidden things in the paper, hundreds of things because of their inspiration. And then it made me inspired to create systems on systems because of the setting. So it's not just geography. The geography absolutely evokes, it drips with the setting if it's done well. You can't help but love Middenheim, Altdorf, Bogenhaven. They're all names that are canon. If you've ever played one, anybody that knows it will just immediately know what it is. It's an amazing thing. So done well, it's everything. It's everything. But they do it in a unique style that really fits. So I like your answers. It really works for me. I like the way you've looked at that.
Awesome, brilliant. So I feel as though published material should succeed because it has these big teams, but actually we've kind of said that sometimes they miss the mark or sometimes they're a bit too close together. So when we get bored of that, we have to do this
back
thing
and let you guys talk about this because this is not my
So let's explore how
it's okay. It's okay. I can learn from you guys. It's fine.
It's a pretty simple thing actually. If you want to do it well, have a good library of normal books and have a very wide geography of those books and pick 2 out at random, and then that will give you something really weird that may or may not work. And that's effectively how things like Firefly, the TV series, come together. Space and cowboys. Because you wouldn't expect it to work, but it does work. So an example of this would be something I thought about the other day. So when I was asked, funny enough, about, have you got any kind of ideas? Because that's often what I'm used for within the RPG industry. People come to me for mechanical ideas or, have you got an idea for this or what do you think of that? And somebody said, what area hasn't been explored in a setting? What kind of thing hasn't been explored? And I said, what I'd love to see? I'd love to see feudal Japan in space. Big corporations, feudal Japan, the focus on feudal Japan in space. I'd absolutely love that. Shogun, ninjas, and have all sorts of thoughts around that. Now, for me, that's an unexplored area that's never been tackled. One, basis of the past, focused on the future. So just imagine that feudal Japan became the world and then went into space. What would that look like? I can see all this Yakuza, hidden bosses, all sorts of stuff that would be just so cool. And I would love all that. Now that would really get.
I wonder if Firefly was never cancelled. I wonder if they would have brought in those Japanese style elements. Because in the film there was the character, the assassin, who was
quite
basically
possibly
styled after a ninja / samurai, because he had the sword, and he would do the hand-to-hand combat. He very much felt like a ninja.
Yeah. And in Westworld, they kind of touched on it, feudal Japan, but they didn't do anything with it, which is it's like just an extension of Westworld, which is a shame. And I do think that there is something in that for a designer to go off and do, and it'd be really good fun and really great if you gave the culture the respect that it deserves and still had that integrity to its past. I think it'd be an amazing setting. I really do. So that's just an example of what you could do. If you just plow anything that you can think of and just put it together. I can certainly see a very interesting game in that.
So the thing with Firefly is that one of the things that Firefly does really well is they kind of predicted the Chinese takeover of like trade and stuff like that, because everything was like Chinese. And like if you look at a lot of the martial arts moves that the assassins use, and this is me being my martial arts nerd self, it was all very wushu based, like kung fu based. Right, like very much like you'll notice that he uses his wrist a lot, and does wrist stuff.
Well, I love all that, because I just thought, when you think about this feudal Japan idea, you could have you would move the karate / the various styles into actually powers of the mind. That's how it would come. So you'd have like those kind of powers of the mind, which would be really cool for certain people who could tap into it. And
Yeah.
I think that'd be a lot of fun. So just an idea, just something I kind of come up with.
Just for listeners' sake, because I've realised that we've kind of went balls to the wall and not actually explain what homebrew is. So homebrew, for people who don't know, is the stuff we make up ourselves. It's like our very own custom material, independent of any publisher most of the time. We might take inspiration from stuff, and it's kind of like your own custom DLC for a game, for a tabletop RPG game. And so Sean, if we carry on with this, like what do we do with that setting then, apart from that interesting thing about like the fact that it's an interesting premise? How do we make that live and breathe as a homebrew setting? And is it similar to what we've already said?
So what you would do is, if like anything, if you're building an adventure or a campaign or even a world, so if you were talking about building the absolute setting first, you start small. That's the first thing you have to do. You literally will take a sandbox, an area that's big enough that, and it might be in my ideas, a little bit big, but maybe a planetary system of maybe 10 or 12 planets or something that you think that you can keep the players in that for a period of time before they have the power to jump further, maybe. And maybe you could control that simply. I'm just spitballing here. These are just ideas that are coming to me as I'm saying it. So I haven't thought about them.
Yeah.
Maybe there is a gate that leaves that planet, that solar system. So the gate technology is available, but the people who have the power of that gate, you have to pay an absolute arm and a leg to use it. They do not tell you how it's used. You can risk jumping through it, but it's a risk. So there's a kind of a control you've already built into your setting. So that's the first thing. You start with a simple area, and then you define that out. You hone in to create that first, and then see what catches fire. You want a rough idea of the overall idea, but you want to see what captures the players' imaginations and then build it on. You don't have to have this campaign setting book that's on everything, because frankly the players aren't going to be everywhere, particularly if it's a fantasy game. Then the reality is they're limited by the distance they can travel, and even if it's a space game, you're limited by the distance you're able to travel. So you have some controls, and that's what I would do to start with, and fine-tune the idea down into a specific thing you're interested in kind of looking at to start with, that you think is going to whet the player's appetite. And the easiest way to do that is in the building process, get your players involved. It's the easiest way. Don't feel you have to do it all the heavy lifting. You can still be running a campaign for people and say, I'm thinking ahead. I've got this idea. What do you think? And if it's shot down before you even reach the building phase, because your players, players that you really trust, aren't interested, they're going to tell you. Most players are fairly honest. But if they go, I really like the sound of that, I'm interested to know more, and I've studied feudal Japan, and that's my wheelhouse, which I may not have known till I've said it, great. So you're already got buying in, and you're already, a portion of the way there before you even begin, because now your players are going to be throwing some really interesting ideas at you. So that's what I would do. Start like you do any adventure. Start small, then build the campaign out. World building is exactly the same. Start small, build it outwards, and keep it simple. You don't need to invent everything. Just know enough that you understand it, and enough of interesting areas to explore. So yeah, that's the way I would go about it, to be honest, to begin with.
It kind of sounds like Troy's thing of loading screens, Leon. Like the idea of like you give them a certain bit, and then if they go over to that bit, you load that bit up. We're like almost not on the fly, but you have some materials, but like then you develop it as they explore it, sort of thing. It's almost like finding the bits on the mini map in a video game. Leon, what was as a player? Let's get you involved in this somehow.
Did that make sense to Leon? I'm kind of curious.
Yeah,
to see
that's what I was going to ask him. Does that make sense to you?
It does make sense to me.
Do you think that would excite you as a player, having that idea?
Sorry for my lack of insight on that, but yeah, it does make sense.
No. Yeah, I get it, and I like the way, like, from that small idea that you had, Sean, and I think that's something we forget, is that you automatically add layers on when you think of the hyperspace gate is controlled by someone. You add an oppressor, you add an antagonist, without even actually doing anything. Like you've not named them, you've not done anything. You've just went, well, they need to get to the gate, but the gate costs a lot, so now there's an antagonist already, and I've not even named them. Like,
and they may well control the power, because if you control the gate, you control all the power. So immediately, it's not a secret they're going to give away. And that's great. It just adds layers. Yeah,
I like that, and I also think you touch on like the purpose of something. So like this idea of, and that's something that I will always say is really important. Is like, what is your world trying to do? and what makes it different. So it's almost like the USP purpose thing together in one. So like in your example, the unique point is like there's these different factions, like these different shoguns and different warlords in the form of corporations.
Yes, absolutely.
I'm a bit of an East Asian history nerd because I used to play a lot of like Samurai Warriors and Dynasty Warriors games, so I like know a lot about it. So you've touched a nerve, and my heart is like full.
Yeah, and I do think, you see, I think because it's an honor. See, what I like about this, you see, this is why I think this is a clever, good idea. It's just an idea; it could really be expanded out on. Is when it comes to people in the future, those that are really honourable, they're not going to fight with blasters and spade. They're going to use swords. That's what they're going to use, because that's the way
they'll go backwards to show their
go
skill,
back,
won't they?
Show their skill, and that really adds a layer to me. That is like, oh wow, that's really cool. You know, I really like that idea. You're not going to get the blaster out. Oh yeah, if you're a thug, you use a blaster. If you're proper, you're going to get your sword out.
You're a gentleman.
I love all that. See, that's just superb, and even adds an element that you just rarely see anymore, which is when a bit like Rome, when a situation occurs where and that's a magical thing about deep politics that you can get in a feudal game like that with Japan, which is wonderful, like Rome, where something happens and the only recourse you have as a player is, I've got no option. I just think that's absolutely brilliant. You know, you just can't put a price on that.
I quite like the idea of like, so obviously Hamilton's just come out and me and my wife are quite obsessed with it. I like the idea of dueling, like even like just even with guns, like, and like you realize that actually there was like this massive code to dueling, and like you had to send people and send letters all the time. And one of the bits in the show is that these two people are sending letters to each other over years before it becomes this duel. And he says, you've got to answer for your crimes against me. And the guy who he's accusing turns around and goes, you're going to have to cite a more specific grievance. Here's an itemized list of 30 years of disagreements.
I love that.
In history, Alexander Hamilton actually sent Aaron Burr every single time they'd fought.
I love that.
So that idea...
That's brilliant, because that works, because, you know, again, for this kind of just thinking round a setting off the fly, I definitely see the, you know, angles that you can go down. You can have the kind of religious sect and what they strive for, but you can also have the kind of, if you want, the lovers. You can kind of have that, how love is an important layer. It's not just something that you do, it's actually something that you work towards. No matter how off bounds that person may be, you would strive, you would work, letter write to them, you would work at it, those things are lost a little, and we need to bring some of those elements back into good settings.
Like the social politics.
Social stuff needs to come back a bit more. So it'd be really good to have, and particularly in light of everything we've said, I think that's needed, because we can show a way that it can be done in a really positive way, which would be really great. Of course,
yeah. Let's move towards this thing then. We've got our shoguns in space. We've fixed it. We've published it or whatever, and we go to our players. What is it that we're gonna do, and what is it that as GMs we're gonna do with that homebrew setting that makes us go? Well, it makes our players go, yeah, I want that so much. How do we convince players of our creative vision, and how do we get them to just want to play?
Please do. I am enjoying listening to you.
Would you like me to continue talking?
It is a pleasure having someone of your experience on this podcast, honestly.
Okay.
Please do. That's why you're here.
Thank you very much. It's really appreciated. I didn't want to take over here, so I really appreciate you giving me the space to talk. So thank you. So obviously, hopefully, you've had that creative initial part where you've brought your players into the creative process. Hopefully, what you've got is that immediate, wow, I really like this idea. This is great, Sean. And they'll give you a steer. That's fine. And then what you want to do is it's about the layers now. So it's about those deeper layers, the darker layers, some of the more interesting layers. You know, the hidden secret clan politics, the various things that a player may have that they have to do because it's part of the honor system. So it might be certain situations where you cannot, like you may not be able to resist a duel. That could be part of your clan. You know, you can never resist a duel, or you know, you can never walk away from someone in need, which would be great. I mean, what a great piece that would be. Someone in need, you have to stand up for them. Those kind of things would be absolutely epic in this and would create some amazing situations. So that's kind of how I do it. And I also think one of the keys to getting the player initial buy-in is the process of building those characters in session 0 and outlining kind of the beginning.
Definitely, yeah.
That initial session 0, those character sheets want to drip of this kind of evocativeness. You want to drip it so it wants to feel more feudal than sci-fi, and the character sheet wants to reflect that value very clearly. Yes, you've got all this kind of tech, but the people that are really powerful don't rely on it. That's the thing that I think is really interesting about it. Yes, it's a need, you have to use it, but they've got different aspirations and different goals. And I think that's what makes it fun. This kind of exploration then stretches out. And then what lies out there to challenge these secret societies? What else is out there that they've come across? And then you can come back to real life. Maybe a virus has swept the planetary systems and created chaos and people are looking for a cure. Maybe there's all sorts that you can tap into that works, or maybe one area of the solar system is out of bounds and risky. So many different things you could do. So that's probably how I would do it. Start with the character sheets to get the buy-in. Hopefully you've got the players loving the kind of character classes that are involved within the setting, and then some of the stuff that you kind of hint at but isn't there yet that they have to work towards to gain, like maybe the chivalrous kind of someone who's for a chivalrous clan or romantic clan, something very unique that you have to have done a certain amount of things before you can actually earn that title. And there should be titles, because it has that feel of a game that people are rewarded, whether it's land or whether it's titles or whatever it is, should have that feel to it, and that honor should drip through it too. So that's how I would try to get the buy-in. But it's not for everybody, and most settings are not for everybody. But if you can get the right group, you're off and running, and then it's wherever the imagination takes you.
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually. That idea of that session 0. My thing that I do when I create a setting or I create a campaign is give the players agency and show that they can change things. So, for example, in our example, if we keep running with this Shoguns in Space idea, have one of the players, if they really wanted to, you are one of the shoguns and these guys are your vassals, and so they can actively implement change in this world by doing things by obeying that honor system, by creating they have power to create a treaty with another region of the or another empire, company, whatever. They can go and that could be the adventure hook, you were going to do a political mission and we're not sure it's going to go well, so we're going to take everybody, and then the other players are everybody else, and they have to protect they then have agency because they have to protect one of these really important VIPs who, if they die, there's a massive issue in a power vacuum or whatever, or the other companies will come in and sweep in, and then that other guy has this almost weight of the universe on his shoulders, because he's if I fuck this up, we are going to war. So I think giving those characters in that session 0 stakes and agency to impact change on the world is really important to make people buy in. Because if it's just static, a bit like how the Sword Coast is, Sword Coast is very static. There's so much lore, Driz de Werden somewhere in the fucking mountains just doing his thing, and he's always going to be more epic than you are. So what's the point? So I think that's really important.
I think you touched on another great point in that. It's worth mentioning here, just because it's so perfect for it, is that a little bit of metagaming is not a bad thing. So people know what a Yakuza is. They've got a kind of an idea what a Shogun is. Those things help you as a GM. It does help you, because immediately you have an investment. You don't need to explain every detail because it's so unique. That's one of the problems with unique settings. People don't understand what you mean. I want the setting to really be clear without needing to make a roll on lore or something. A lot of it I'd like you to know without me having to explain it, and then other things we can peel the layers back.
Yeah,
do you agree with that, Leon?
Ultimately, at the end of the game, at the end of the day,
original under the sun. You should steal ideas from other people as much as you can.
It's a game, and in the same way you would metagame in a video game, it's not wrong to do it. As long as you're not reading stat blocks and things like that. You know, it's not that much of an issue, is it? It's a game. Yeah.
Yeah. It's for the purpose of pushing the game along or helping with immersion. There's nothing wrong with that.
So one of the things that I think people make a mistake with when they are building homebrew worlds and they're creating things is they think that everything has to be 100% original.
No. This whole thing is built on tropes. The whole thing.
Yeah, like exactly. The whole thing. Like for example, one of my most successful worlds that I've ever built is called Ramph. And all I did with that is take 30 Days of Night, the film, and extend that to a whole season, and then add all the things from D&D that also come out at night, not just vampires in Alaska. Like, I was like, you know what would it be like if, like, every 4 years everybody's just preparing for this, like, 3 months of continuous nighttime that is just coming, and everything comes out and goes bump in the night. And, like, so I thought about that. I didn't go, right, I need a completely original thing. Like, obviously everybody's going to want lights in that time. So one of the missions is
yeah, absolutely, I agree.
Yeah,
why not?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'm actually gagging to do a samurai world, but thanks to Sean, and I'm like, oh no, I need to be a samurai. I need to, like, be fleeing for Sakigahara or something. Like, again, like, I know most of the battles, so I'm like, they're like, I could do this. I could make Nobunaga Oda. I could do it right here, right now. It's so great.
We're magpies. We steal everything. If it's not nailed down, I take it. Yeah, I mean, I'm not frightened to say if somebody says something to me. It often happens. I was on holiday years ago. I was in Athens, places, and I happened to saw this chap who was working in a graveyard. He was a really interesting old man. He had this kind of ragged face. I thought, wow, that's a really interesting looking guy. I wonder if he speaks English. Classic English. We expect everybody to speak English. So I wandered up there, you know. And I got chatting to him, and it was kind of pidgin English, and we kind of hit it off quite well, and he invited me back to his house. It was ever so funny. And when we got there, I found out he was their local gravekeeper, and he was telling me about the use of lime, you know, how lime destroys dead bodies in 30 days. I stored that away, you know, that's like an instant, wow, you know, bang, I can use this. So in life, you know, wherever you walk every day, there's always something you get and you can use in your games, whether it's now, 10 years, 15, 20 years, there's always something. And the more that you've stored away, because that's what a great magpie does, the better it is. Because at a split second, like you just said with Purge World, now my mind's gone, oh yeah, wouldn't it be fun if in one of my games, some point, for no reason, the characters wander into a town and they don't know that the night they wander in is Purge Night? Great. I just thought, oh yeah, that's a really good idea. I love that. So, you know, everything goes.
Yeah. I tell you something that from real life. I don't know how you live in the Ketchum.
No, I've only been
here
for a couple of years. I'm not that.
Do you know, like, Rothwell and Desborough?
Yeah, I do know them. I'm not really native to the area, but I have been
What
here
about
now.
you, Sean?
I've now been up this way.
Do you know the festival they do once a year? I think it's in Rothwell, where it is a dark place. It's like the Elephant Graveyard, but they do this thing where they basically play football. Like, all the men in the town get hammered,
I mean,
and play like really high contact football.
My brother ever
throughout
runs
the
me,
town,
and I don't play very many games. I like GMing. It's just the way I am. But my brother ran a game for when we were much younger, and it's about two towns playing with a head, try and get it into a goal. And it was an excellent story because it's real life.
Yeah.
You've seen them play football in these towns, and they go over miles of distance kicking this football. Great. I mean, you take inspiration wherever you can find it. That's what settings and what GMs do, and that's what we all do, you know. That's the best piece of advice that anybody could ever give you. Really is, like these guys have said, just magpie it away, steal it, take any ideas you can. Nothing is sacred to a GM. You know, we don't mind if you take stuff from us. We don't care. We quite happily take wherever we can get it.
Well, I think that I need to take all this. I need to run away and go make some money. Personally,
there's something there for you.
Joking. Obviously, I cut you in. Yeah. So I want to talk about settings we'd like to see, because I think that the tabletop RPG world, with this new like renaissance that it's seen, is seeing like this massive influx of people getting into the space, and including new like intellectual properties of already existing shows, video games. Me and Leon were talking about the fact that the game Desperado, which is a long time like Mexican standoff sort of like sim, like tactical shooter, that's been on computer since the 90s, because I remember having a copy on like when there was still dial-up, so it's always been around. Has recently released a completely free RPG. League of Legends, the video game, has got involved with Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition. Is there any particular settings from like a popular form of media that you'd love to see get like its own tabletop RPG system, or be introduced in 5th edition or Pathfinder or whatever? Or do you think that actually you'd prefer them to like leave it out and stay out in their lane? What do you think about that, guys?
What hasn't been done at this point? I know it's
a big question.
There is a Witcher TTRPG. What else is there? There's Dragon Age. There's Game of Thrones. It feels like there's an RPG for everything at the moment.
Well,
go on.
I think you touch on the point that's perfect, actually, Leon, which is, I've always said, I think I've mentioned this to you before, Adderson, and actually the truth is that there's seven key stories. Break it up however you like. I think you know this from a creative point of view. There's a kind of a truth to why fantasy is the biggest selling and most popular, because it's the easiest one, it's more controllable, it's the easiest one for people to gravitate into, and there's lots of reasons. But if you want to say what is out there, well, it's easy. Grab a book, challenge yourself as a GM or a designer, grab that book, take it, build it. And that is the quickest way as a player and a GM. If you want to challenge yourself as a GM, take a book not your style, not your genre. Take that book, design a mini system around creating characters in it, and try to run that story without telling the players that's what you're doing. And once you finish running it, no matter how small, 3-4 sessions, whatever it is, give them the book and say, read it and say, how good did you feel I got to the story in that book? Did you feel without me railroading you? Did you feel that story come out? And look at where we ended up compared to the book. It's the greatest way of, from a designing point of view, challenging yourself as well as being a GM and challenging yourself. It's the quickest way to find out what genres work. And I've got some great favourites. One of my favourite is Robert Ludlum's book. This is originally where I learned the idea from, and it's a wonderful book about the Holcroft Covenant. And it's a story about a man who is phoned up. It's 1980s, set in the 80s, early 80s. Who's phoned up from a Swiss bank in Zurich and is told he's the beneficiary of a particular chap who's basically, there's a lot of money at stake. Can he make his way to Switzerland immediately? And of course he looks into it to find out this is real, and then heads there. And then there's a complete story about what this money is. But in essence, what it is Fourth Reich money. And this man, the Germans need him to get this money out so they can actually kill him off and start using it. It's brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant. So it's a great... It's an absolutely great story. And also part of the story is he's got to find the other people who are also heirs to this fortune and bring them all together to the Zurich bank. And of course they want him to do this. So there's lots of little clues along the way to try and lull him along. And it's absolutely excellent. It's an excellent story, but it really challenges you. But fun, because it's a period I wasn't familiar with. That's one of the reasons why I've cut my teeth on fantasy. That's where I grew up and loved. And I love Dungeons and Dragons. I think 5th edition is brilliant, frankly. It's a real tour de force back into what makes it great. But I also like the challenge of things like Cthulhu. It's funny, I've become well known with Cthulhu, but it's not a system that actually, I can honestly say it wasn't necessarily my first love. But it's a system I've grown to love because it's made me challenge me in a unique way, and I wouldn't be able to do that unless I was pushed a little bit and said, hey, you've got to cut your teeth on this if you want to find out how good you are at something. And that's a great way of learning. So grab a book, any book, particularly if it's not popular. Find a book from the 50s and 60s pulp culture, find one and run it. You'll be surprised at what comes out. There's some amazing ideas in there.
That is a good point. I think that some people have said about running biographies. So like you find somebody's biography who had an interest in life. One of my friends is very, very obsessed with like Theodore Roosevelt and how like cool his life was. He says like he had to read it at uni, and he said like what he does all these cool things. He's like, next you're going to tell me he becomes the president of the United States, and obviously the next chapter is literally when I became the president of the United States. Yeah. So I was like, fuck's sake, like But he said, like, when he found out I was into Dungeons and Dragons, he was like, you could actually make probably the best campaign ever if you somehow had this guy and his mates who were adventurers, and one of them becomes the president of like or the king of their country or something like that.
You're absolutely
using
spot on. I mean,
what he's learned and everything. Like, it would be...
and it's ridiculous to say this because, again, we were collaborating and kind of coming up with ideas together. We kind of had an idea as two GMs originally to build a world together, and then put two different groups in it who didn't know that they were playing in this world quite close together, and then eventually they would overlap, and we'd bring them to the table as a group of 12, which was really great fun. But during that process, part of his designing, he built this character, and it was absolutely excellent. This character was a pacifist. It's beautiful, the piece that he did on it. And it was only afterwards I said, where was your inspiration? He said, well, it was obvious, really. It's Gandhi. It's brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And I was like, oh wow, that's so powerful. And the politics that came out through this character who would not fight, who was putting up this, it was amazing. And again, we can learn a lesson. We really can. So brilliant, really.
Creating those characters from those real life historians. I know that there's a massive thing about gamification in the classroom and using Dungeons and Dragons to like go through like historical figures and characters in books.
Yeah, I do it at the school I work for. I work with special needs children, and part of that, I have the great privilege now of working. I'm very fortunate to work in what's called the pastoral unit there. Very fortunate job to have, because it really sidelines. It's that classic. It keeps me legal.
Yeah.
It's that classic. Keeps me legal. I'm actually a taxpayer. But it's this brilliant thing of what I love is I'm able to then, because it's a very nice job in terms of the hours. You can do all your gaming stuff, and you can do all your creating as well as, and that's also very nice. But through that, of course, I work with some very special children who, the art of when you GM for them, and that's a skill in itself. But the creative stuff that comes out of that, some of it's been amazing. I can tell you. The one time I had a full battle with a young lad and it was literally, we did it with Lego pieces, and it's the most amazing. I mean, I never thought of it that way before, but because of his mind, brilliant. Lego ships, a couple of bricks on each end. You've suddenly got a little boat, easy to show. Units in Lego units, fabulous. I mean, the cheapest way of having a war I've ever seen in my life, and it felt so good. We had this battle that lasted, I think it was seven days, equivalent 7 lunch breaks, where it was these two sides battling off each other. Obviously, I had to let him win. I didn't want the place destroyed, but but of course, it was great because he learned so much through the play, and that's what role play does as well. It really can help people, and particularly people perhaps who struggle, maybe in some social ways. They can bring out the best in themselves and actually feel more comfortable in social circles, which I find is another great thing about role playing. Everybody's included. That's the magical thing about it.
Well, it's time, Leon. Grab the dice and let's plug in for the deck of many questions. Sean, we'd love for you to join us in this. Are you down?
Oh, absolutely. Really excited about it. Can't wait.
So the deck of many questions is our end segment for those who are listening, where we take user-submitted questions and randomly ask one to each of the people on the show for today. If you would like to submit questions, either submit them in the comments below or onto our social medias and stack the deck either in or against our favour. Now, Leon and Sean, let's roll to see who goes first, second and third, and then we'll get down to those juicy questions. And Sean would like to do two questions. Is that all right, Leon?
Because I'm greedy, you see, so I really appreciate you allowing me that extra opportunity.
He wants to show off.
In a hole.
He's flexing on us, Leon. We can only manage one.
Okay, well, Sean's going first, and he has got question 41.
41.
Question 41 is submitted by Alex Boston.
Yep.
And the question is, have you ever regretted starting a campaign, even if it turned out well?
Yeah, you do actually go through sometimes as a GM, because it's a selfless act being a GM. And you will do campaigns, and my campaigns normally always last 2+ years, to be honest. And sometimes you put that 2 years in, and you know you're not doing it for you. You're just doing it for your players. And that is the hardest thing of all sometimes as a GM for me. But it's like a quid pro quo. You do it because it may not be the campaign you're enjoying the most, but it's funny, it's always the case that the campaign you don't enjoy the most is the one the players remember 30 years later. Let me tell you that. So never see them as anything other than what they are, which is, just do your best, do whatever you think is going to work, be a bit selfless at times for your players, and the rewards will speak for themselves, because I promise you, even though you might regret that you didn't enjoy it as much as some of the others, and you felt some of the campaigns that you thought were amazing, the players didn't really get as much as this one that stands out in their mind for reasons that you still don't understand. That doesn't matter. It is part of the process of being what I call a great GM. You have to go through these hoops, and it is sometimes really difficult for others to understand, because people think as a GM it's all about what you want, and it actually isn't. And that's the surprising thing that I came out of after years of GMing, that there are times where you'll put things together and it really isn't for you at all, and you kind of regret it a little, but you never really regret it, because I'm still committed to making sure it's the best game I can run.
Awesome. That's a great answer to that question. Leon, do you want to go second, or would you like me to go second? We'll let Sean,
and then we'll do Sean's last one at the end. Yeah.
Fabulous. Yeah. Thank you.
All right. So Adderson, you have question 9.
Ooh. Question 9 is submitted by Paige. If you could put together a party of 4, and you could choose anybody to play, dead or alive, who would you choose? So this is
Sean. Do you want to take this one?
Yeah, I'd love to take this question. I mean, I actually have a party of 4 in mind, actually, surprisingly. I'm sure you don't know this, do you?
No.
If I had to put together a party, it would be these people as the ones I would choose, and for these roles as well. So Ibris, the great detective Ibris. It's my favourite.
Oh, yeah, Idris Elba?
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Thank you for helping me out. I have the same problem every time with his name. I absolutely love his portrayal of characters, and it's his mannerisms, his body language that really I can't help, my eyes are always focused on him. There could 50 people in a room and it's him I look at. So I'd love him to play the High Wizard. I'd love to see what he does with that role. I just think he'd be perfect for it. I'd get Cumberbatch and reverse roles on him, because I love his portrayal of Sherlock, so he'd be my rogue in my group, and I'd love to see what he could do with a rogue character. And then I take a very controversial figure who I love just purely from the way he portrayed his voice, which is Winston Churchill. And he would be my bard for negotiation purposes, because I'd really enjoy that old man mix. Everybody thinks a bard has to be charismatic, but you can be that through the voice. And I'd love to hear how he would handle difficult situations. And then, of course, you've got to have somebody just because you want them. And it's Drew Barrymore. She can play any character she likes in my group. So that's the 4 that I would choose for my party. And I'd be happy to tag along with them and see where this leads us.
That is an party.
That is an amazing party. Winston Churchill with the new College of Eloquence from Pharos. You'll find them on the beaches.
That'd be great fun, yeah. Yeah, using some of his quotes. He had some great one-liners as well. He's a very funny man, actually. A lot of people didn't realise that some of his humour, like, there's a great quote one time during his Prime Minister years, and it was the difficult, dark time in London. He was stopped literally on the street, because then people could actually stop the Prime Minister. And he was literally stopped on the steps of 10 Downing Street, and people were moaning about him. And one woman in particular said, "If you were my husband, I'd poison your tea." And you've got to remember the 1940s. And he turns around as quick as a flash and says, "If you were my wife, I'd drink it." And it's that kind of stuff that really inspires me. It's actually quite funny.
All right, then. I'll take a question. Then, Leon, you can see us out, and we'll head off into the social media.
Addison.
Question 28. So that's submitted by me. I think I've done this question before. It's about the characters from film and TV and stuff.
Let's roll again. You have question 26.
26. Also submitted by me. But what is the one piece of official published D&D material, race, class, spell, etc., you would change if you had the chance?
That's a great question.
This is a good one. There's a few answers I have for this.
I'm up for basically any time you get a companion, anytime you get some sort of like animal companion, a familiar, the Beastmaster Ranger, and in a way the Artificer, like they need some serious work, because actually PHB Ranger's animal thing and the mechanic of how it works doesn't work properly. Like it's not very good, like at all. You can't tame larger animals. Your animal has to like take your turn. You don't fight in tandem with it. It fights for you, which isn't the flavor text that it gives off. And then the familiar as well does the same sort of thing, where it's like it can't attack, but then as a familiar, you can get like a Quasit, which is better than most of the Ranger things because it can turn invisible and it can transform, and imps and pseudo dragons, but it still can't attack, even though we know from folklore and stuff that familiars are very accustomed to defending themselves in legend and stuff like that. So and then you've got the artificer that just gets this massive metal dog that's just awesome, and you're like, well, what's the point then? Like, I thought you were supposed to be like creating things, not just wandering around with like Fallout New Vegas's like robot dog. It makes no sense to me. So I think that would be my bit of like of published content, is like familiars, like animal companions, and like anything that gives you like a companion, because it just doesn't work. It seems as if like they want you to not enjoy having that and using it to its fullest potential. They're like, oh yeah, you can have an animal companion, but it takes all your attacks, and it's like, well, what's the point of it then? Like,
it feels like they're just there to use the help action and give you advantage on your attacks.
Yeah,
but sometimes they have some really cool abilities that you would like to use.
Exactly.
For their attacks. Yeah,
I
don't know.
I feel as if it should be a bonus action, because the whole point of the Beastmaster, especially in previous editions of D&D and Pathfinder, it's been like you fight with your animal, and actually your animal grows a lot better, and you can eventually tame better animals, or have like a menagerie of animals that follow you around, and like an army of animals with you, and it's like, that's sick. Whereas the PHB Ranger is a bit like, meh, we know you like pets. So yeah,
that's a good answer.
That would be my thing. Leon, what question would you like, my friend?
I would like question 32, please.
Question 32 is submitted by Paige. And what makes a bad player in your opinion? What makes a bad player in your opinion?
Great question.
There's a few answers to this episode. The one that instantly springs to mind is the murder hobo, the guy who walks into a pub and just decides to punch somebody in the face, or the guy who is in the middle of a conversation with somebody who's being perfectly cordial and decides to shoot him in the foot.
Yeah.
Hey, hang on.
Yeah.
I feel attacked. No, I'm joking. Keep going.
There's the player who I think probably the biggest one is the player that refuses to be a team player. Somebody who would cast silence in a room where you're having a fight in, so that all of your spellcasters can't use half of their spells now. I think that's the worst type of player. Yeah, that's the worst type of player, I think. The one that just refuses to be a team player. You'll have this mission that you're all on, and the player decides, you know what, my character wouldn't do this, so I'm not going to go. I'm going to go over there instead, and then just sits there for the whole session, and then complains that they're not involved in the game. Something like that. That's my worst type of player, the one that's not a team player.
You get that thing, that dreaded line. Like, there's sometimes when you love this line, and then there's that other time when it's just like, but it's what my character would do. And you want to throw like the heaviest book you've got at them. So yeah, I feel you. I feel you for that one. That's So yeah, that's everything, isn't it, Leon? We've done our questions. Sean's been greedy and had 2. Thank you. We'd like to thank Sean for coming to hang out with us. It has been an amazing episode with some great ideas, some beautiful
much,
conversation.
Sean.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you for the invite, and I look forward to seeing you another time.
I feel as if
we'll definitely
time,
have to do this again.
Because every time I have a conversation with you about DMing, I learn something, and I'm like, ooh.
I really appreciate that. I
really do. Yeah, Sean, is there anything you'd like to plug in terms of yourself? Like, have you got any projects?
No, not particularly, but I would just say that if reach out if you need any support as a DM in any capacity that it is. Do go through any medium that you can find us. If you have the will, you will find us. We're like the A-team of DMing. People will come and find us eventually, find a way to us. Then I will help you in any way I can, whatever you need for however long it is, and that is just what GMs do. We are there to help each other, and in these difficult times, doesn't that make a lot of sense?
It does. It does. Leon, let the people all know where they can find us, and then
you can find us on Twitter at on Twitter at PodOManyThings, on Facebook and Instagram at the PodOManyThings, and on Podbean, which is the full name, the Pod of Many Things.
Well, thank you. Have a lovely evening, day, whatever time you're listening, and we hope to see you again soon.
Ciao, ciao.
Ciao.